Hello, friends, and welcome to the show. Today I'm going to be talking about how the Washington Post fact checkers won't be counting Biden's claims as they did Donald Trump's. Also, I'll be talking about how Megyn Kelly says the media is partly to blame for the Capitol riots. But before we get started, go ahead and smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you would like to contribute to the show, please go to notcensored.com/donate. You'll find links available to contribute to the show where you would be supporting us to produce more consistent content and help keep us independent from outside influence. So let's get started. This is an article from the Daily Wire by Joseph Curl, January 24th. Glenn Kessler, a fact checker, nicely in quotes for the Washington Post, kept track of everything he and a team of deemers deemed to be a lie uttered by President Trump. So if you recall, Glenn Kessler is the fact checker that I fact-checked the fact checkers on regarding something about Antifa, where he said there was no evidence Antifa led any acts of violence and that it was just an ideology. There was no proof that they actually did anything or they physically existed. But he used a source that was 6 months old. I found a source that was only 3 months old from the publication date of his article, and basically stating that a self-proclaimed Antifa member murdered a Trump supporter on the street for the sole reason of them being a Trump supporter, so debunking his fact check. So he was spreading misinformation while claiming to be a fact checker. So I don't understand how he still has a job, to be honest, but I digress. His final tally of Trump's false and misleading statements, 30,573. So again, if he's lying, if he's being inauthentic about his fact checks, is it really 30,573? I don't know. And I don't want to have to go through 30,573 fact checks to prove them right or wrong. Because, of course, Trump lied. Of course, Obama lied. Everybody lies, right? It's just to the degree and to the extent of which they lie. Is it a fib? Is it this morning I didn't have breakfast, but technically I had a protein shake at 11. So fact check false. I did have breakfast because it was at 11. I don't know. Maybe I should look into it. I probably will, and I'll probably pick out some of the more egregious ones and do videos on that because I think it'll be entertaining to kind of fact check the fact checkers. It's actually a lot of fun to do. But according to a new report, the Post team won't be keeping score on President Biden, a Democrat. Trump's departure also equals an end to having a false claims project for the current president, as the Post said it does not have plans to launch a Biden database at this time, the Daily Caller wrote. The database of Trump's claims was started a month after Trump became president as a way to not overwhelm our fact-checking enterprise, where the core mission is to explain complex policy issues, Shady George told the Caller. While we do not have plans to launch a Biden database at this time, we will continue to dig into the accuracy of statements by political figures of all party affiliations. I doubt that. Back on January 16th, Kessler explained in a CNN appearance why he won't keep a list of alleged lies from Biden. I assume the Biden presidency will be a lot like the Obama presidency, and that they will be responsive and will be able to quickly back up what they're saying, he told host Victor Blackwell. So here's a quick minute from that interview.
Let me ask you about the president-elect. He made a lot of pretty dramatic claims in his speech on Thursday evening. I understand that your team reached out to him, and just compare and contrast the reaction and response you got from the incoming administration to what you've gotten over the last several years.
Well, in the case of the Biden-Harris transition team, we identified 5 factual statements he made, interesting claims that we wanted to know if what was the basis for this. Within 15 minutes, we received citations to those factual statements, and they all checked out. Generally, the Trump White House almost never responded to our queries because, of course, a lot of what the president said could not be defended or explained in terms of where he got these so-called facts.
So these so-called facts, they reached out 30,000 times. So 30 to 50 times a day, most likely, that they're reaching out to the Trump's office asking for clarification. Do you think at a certain point they would just stop responding because they would just view it as harassment? You are contacting them 30 times a day, friend. even back it up. So I believe 30 times a day would say 30,000 over the course of 3.5 years. So say you contacted them 25 times a day. That's still 25 emails a day that people would have to respond to. That's even if it takes 5 minutes to respond to each email. What is that? 5 minutes times 25. 125 minutes. That's a little over 2 hours. You're asking for 2 hours of the president's or his people's time every single day to answer your fact check. And we all know that it would probably take more than 5 minutes to respond to each of these emails. So it's kind of disingenuous to go, well, they just stopped responding, or we would never hear back because, obviously their information couldn't be backed up by anything. No, maybe they just didn't want to waste their time because 2 hours a day over the course of a year, that's 730 hours over the course of a year. That's a lot of time, people. And for these reporters, for these fact checkers to believe that they're so important just to waste time. And like I said, there's a difference between a fib and a lie. And going, okay, well, Trump exaggerated this. This is a lie. This is a misleading statement. Trump is not a politician, friends. Trump is a New York real estate billionaire. That's how he became a pop culture icon, because he is rich. He says outrageous things. I posted a Twitter thing where he said someone's never going to be as rich as I am, and then someone made a joke about his Johnson, and he's like, well, nothing's bigger than mine. And that was from 2013, and I couldn't stop laughing because it was Trump, right? So people don't understand Trump is one of the OG Twitter trolls. And so when they say, oh, well, he lies, he misleads, the dude's a troll. The dude is a 74-year-old troll. He's not a politician. He's not polished. The same, I'll talk about it here in a little bit on the Megyn Kelly piece, but he is essentially a stand-up comedian. He says a lot of things off the cuff, and he goes with his gut, like it or not. But that's what made him a lot of money. Let's finish out this video.
I assume the Biden, I did 5 years of Obama, and I assume the Biden presidency will be a lot like the Obama presidency, and that they will be responsive.
Maybe they'll be bombing 16-year-old American teenagers.
And will be able to quickly back up what they're saying. And occasionally the president will go off kilter, particularly when he's, speaking extemporaneously and not following something that a script that the previous.
So basically he says, well, maybe Biden will lie if he speaks off the cuff, but if he's reading from a transcript, if he's reading from a fact-checked script, then obviously he won't be lying because someone has fact-checked what he's reading. But from what I recall, Trump really doesn't read off a prompter. A lot of what he does is off the cuff. And so by those same standards, they shouldn't have been fact-checking Trump if all he was doing was speaking off the cuff. You can't have it both ways, friends. You have to maintain one standard, or you're going to create a patina of basically, what's the opposite of objectivity? Favoritism. On Twitter, Kessler wrote, I had questioned about 5 factual statements and a recent Biden speech. I received citations and documents backing up those numbers 15 minutes after sending an emailed request for backup. And so even with Joe Biden's already lying about his presidency. He's had misleading statements. His presidency, his cabinet, his press secretary is already lying to the people, and no one is fact checking it. And that's an issue. Fauci is actually fact checking his cabinet or the people representing his presidency, his COVID response. And nobody is talking about it other than conservative outlets. So maybe there should be a rolling fact checker so we can see just how often these politicians are full of it, because it needs to be called out that these full-time politicians are just as bad as non-politicians, if not worse. Because especially if we're going to hold them, we're back to normalcy. Daddy's home. Oh, I can go back to sleep because it's like daddy's driving and I'm sleeping in the back seat. I believe a reporter wrote that. And all I have to say to that is, what happens when it's found out that Joe Biden lies just as much as Trump? it's not normal. Or if that is normal, then Trump wasn't not normal. He was just a different kind of normal. In its own report, Newsbusters wrote, Kessler warmly accepted Biden's use of liberal think tanks like the Brookings Institution, the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, and poverty analysts at Columbia University, backed by liberal foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But when Trump used the National Federation of Independent Business for a survey of small business confidence in 2018, Kessler dismissed it as a conservative group whose survey didn't draw enough responses to impress him. So basically saying, well, it's okay when people on the left, when Biden uses stuff backed by liberal donors, that's okay. When Trump uses stuff backed by conservative groups, that is not okay. And again, that's not okay. You need to have one set of standards. If you have multiple sets of standards, you're just gaslighting the American public. The Federalist is having a piece. Here's a full list of every lie Joe Biden has told as president. But the Federalist is partisan, but they are not, they don't hide it. They push that agenda. They don't claim to be objective. They just say, this is what it is from our point of view, which is refreshing. Same thing with the Daily Wire. So a lot of people say, oh, it's the fastest growing conservative media companies and countercultural outlets for news, opinion, and entertainment, right? And they say, oh, well, it has a conservative glasses on. And it's like, well, they admit it. They go out of their way to tell you up front, hey, we are a conservative media company offering a counterculture to the liberal establishment, which is far more noble than basically saying, well, we're super objective while basically supporting anything liberal and kicking down anything conservative because you're partisan pretending to be not. So let's go over to the Hill. Megyn Kelly says media partly to blame for Capitol riot. They couldn't check their feelings about Trump. Journalist Megyn Kelly, in a recent interview, laid some of the blame for deadly rioting by supporters of former President Trump at the feet of the media, saying members of the press couldn't check their personal feelings about him. They hated him so much, they checked their objectivity, Kelly told BBC Newsnight. It wasn't just CNN. All of them did. They couldn't just check their own personal feelings about him. Or part of the reason for the rioting at the Capitol earlier this month, Kelly said, was because there had been a complete lack of trust, a destruction of trust in the media, and people don't know where to turn for true information. So, perfect example. I believe it was the same day or perhaps the day before, the Kenosha DA came out and said, without a shadow of doubt, Jacob Blake was armed. Jacob Blake, every time we interviewed him, admitted as such. He never denied the fact that he was armed. Jacob Blake has since then came out with an interview basically saying, oh yeah, man, I should not have gone for that knife after I dropped it. I dropped the knife and I went to go pick up the knife and I ended up getting shot in the back. So there was no dispute as to whether or not Jacob Blake was armed. And what did the Washington Post do? The Washington Post said, white cop who shot unarmed black man will not face charges, which is bananas. I guess they just put their fingers in their ears and refused to listen to the part where, without a shadow of a doubt, Jacob Blake was armed. There is no disputing that fact. If there's nothing else we've learned from this, it's that he was armed. There is no doubt about it, friends. And what did the Washington Post say? Jacob Blake, an unarmed man, was shot by a white police officer who is not going to be facing charges. And what do you expect is going to happen? You're going to have one side believe it because they're trained to believe anything the media says. And then you're going to have the people who watch the interview and then see the news's response, basically see the news outlets saying an unarmed black. It's like, no, he wasn't unarmed. The DA has said without a shadow of a doubt he was armed. There was nothing disputing that fact. Incontrovertibly true. He was armed. You can debate whether or not it was right that he was shot, but the argument as to whether or not he was armed is not up for debate. He was armed. By his own admission, he was armed. And you have news outlets basically just gaslighting the American people, stoking tensions on both sides, because you have one side not trusting anything they're told because they see and hear something completely different from what's being presented to them by the news. And then you have individuals that are low information, not willing to search out that information, to spend the 10 minutes to watch that news conference, to listen to that speech, to do the legwork, or to watch the video, right? And they'll just go from the narrative that the news companies give. So you have your low information people, you have your more information people. Not saying everybody on the right's high information and everybody on the left is low information, but it's definitely with the mainstream media. You have those who only get their information from the mainstream media, and people who tend to not trust the mainstream media and go directly for a primary source like the DA interview. And that causes that rift because I'll say, well, he was armed. And people will say, well, the Washington Post said he was unarmed. And then that cop's not facing charges for shooting him. The DA, spend the 5 minutes, watch where the DA said, without a doubt, the dude was armed. And they're not willing to take the time. They're just going to read the headline, and then it's just going to cause more tension through the country. So you're gaslighting both sides, and it's bananas. He's been called a narcissist, but you don't become president of the U.S. if you're not a narcissist, says Megyn Kelly, which is true. You also have to be a masochist as well. You have to gladly take those whippings. Moments before hundreds of protesters stormed the Capitol, Trump spoke at a rally on the National Mall, repeating unproven claims of a stolen election and urging his supporters to march to the complex as lawmakers met inside to certify President Biden's victory. That's ambiguously written. So, yes, Trump said that. Yes, Trump gave that speech. But that while they're storming the complex, Trump was still giving a speech, friends. And it's like an hour walk between the two places. So I find it hard to say Trump incited a riot when the riot was occurring while he was giving the speech. I'd understand if he gave the speech and then an hour and a half later, that entire 1 million person crowd worked their way down to the Capitol and then 1 million people stormed into the Capitol. No, Trump was giving a speech and 200 people broke into the Capitol. 200 people out of 1.3 million. If you want to say that 93% of the protests during the summer of 2020 were peaceful and that we should focus on those, then we need to be doing the same thing for this. Because if you want, it's even a higher number if you have 1.3 million versus 200 people, whether you like it or not. The House impeached Trump a week later on one charge of inciting insurrection in connection with the attack. The Senate trial is expected to begin the week of February 8th. The media should have tried harder to take a hard look at his policies and see him clearly. Adding that Trump was larger-than-life figure who sucked up all the oxygen in the room because he was so personally controversial. Trump and his supporters regularly lashed out at members of the press during his time in office, accusing them of peddling fake news and displaying personal bias against Trump, which is not fake news because they obviously showed personal bias against Trump when you had people, you even have government officials who had worked under Trump now saying, oh, I wonder what you're thinking right now, Mr. Trump, because I saw that on my Twitter feed this morning. Oh, it's so nice to not have to listen to what Trump's tweeting about. Basically just mocking the fact that he's banned off of Twitter. And it's like, dude, you worked for Trump and you're supposed to have people believe that you weren't a problem while you were working for him? Come on, dude, get over yourself. Images and video taken the day of the rioting at the Capitol show some demonstrators berating or assaulting members of the media covering the protest. And you can also say that some of the demonstrators berating or assaulting members of the media covering all the protests that happened in 2020 as well. But obviously, that does not push this agenda. Kelly and Trump famously clashed at a Republican primary debate during the 2016 presidential campaign after she pressed him over disparaging comments he had made about women. And if I recall, it was only about Rosie O'Donnell. So people forget, the dude is a stand-up comedian. The guy is a billionaire playboy. He says whatever he needs to say to make money. He exaggerates for effect. He talks things up. He needs to make things seem bigger than they are, make things seem worth more than they are in order to bolster appearance in order to make more money. Because if he creates the thing around his brand, then people are going to be more interested in purchasing Trump products, going to Trump hotels, playing Trump golf. So remember that, friends, the next time you decide to bash on a businessman who decides to go into politics. But that's going to be it for now. I'm going to be looking for more information to put out another video. I'll talk to you later, friends.